Thank you all for coming on such a beautiful day, taking time out to come indoors and listen to us. I know you'd only do that if you thought it was important, and it is. It's extremely important. For a variety of reasons, I just want to touch on two. One, national security, and two, the economy. Like the general, I came to support Barack Obama. I decided that about 15 months ago, after I spent some time briefing him on terrorism and national security issues. And I have been briefing senators and presidents, secretaries of defense and secretaries of state for a very long time. I have to tell you, I have never met someone other than Bill Clinton who was as smart, as quick, who understood, and yet who was also humble and asked good questions, as Barack Obama. And if you look at his resume, it's not as long as some other people's, it's not as long as Senator McCain's. But I don't think length of resume is as important as judgment. Because if length of resume were a good metric, then Dick Cheney would have done a good job. What about judgment? Let's look at three, I think, national security issues and compare the two candidates' judgment. On Iraq, Senator McCain was one of the cheerleaders before the decision was even made to go into Iraq. Before 9/11, he was urging that we invade Iraq. Right after 9/11, that week, he was running around Washington trying to get people to agree to invade Iraq. And saying that Iraq had something to do with 9/11. Which it did, trust me, it did. Barack Obama, on the other hand, said on the record in Illinois, he opposed going in, he opposed the war. He said it would be counterproductive, it would strengthen our enemies. Now, you judge who was right. It has greatly strengthened our enemies, and it has done enormous damage to our army, as the general knows, and it's killed over 4,000 of our men and women, wounded over 25,000 of our men, and spent at least $1 trillion of our dollars, and we didn't have to do it at all. Instead, we should have been working against Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. And that's the second issue, Afghanistan. John McCain said a year ago, well, we should just muddle through in Afghanistan. Barack Obama said over a year ago that things were going badly there, that we weren't winning the war against the real terrorists, Al-Qaeda, who attacked us on 9/11. And in fact, that Al-Qaeda was getting resurgent. And so over a year ago, he called for a comprehensive plan, economic development assistance, and sending 2 additional U.S. Army brigades into Afghanistan. Now what's happened? Now what's happened is that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the Secretary of Defense have said, we have to send 2 more brigades into Afghanistan, and that we're losing the war there. A year later, they validated what Barack Obama said. Just as with Iraq. In Iraq, Obama called for a timetable, not a rigid schedule, but a timetable, a goal for getting us out. And McCain said, no, the timetable was awful. And now the Iraqi government and the Bush administration have agreed on a timetable. So who was right? We have to go after the terrorists, Al-Qaeda, because they are resurging. Would you have imagined that 7 years after 9/11, 7 years after that horrific day, that Al-Qaeda would still be around, still be threatening us? The director of CIA said a couple of months ago that not only are they still around, but they are now stronger than they've been in years. And according to the director of CIA, they are capable of attacking us here again in the United States. This week, yesterday, they blew up the Marriott Hotel and killed 40 people, including a U.S. soldier in Islamabad. Earlier in the week, they blew up, or tried to blow up, our embassy they're still around. Why? Because we took our eye off the ball. We transferred intelligence assets, we transferred some of our special forces from Afghanistan to get ready to go into Iraq. We didn't finish the job. And because we pulled forces off for Iraq, Al-Qaeda reconstituted. And posed a threat again today. Because people like John McCain wanted us, urged us to go into Iraq. I think those are two examples. But the third example is the most recent one. The first thing you do as a presidential nominee of either party is your first and in some ways your most demanding national security decision. You choose who will replace you if you die in office. And that's really important. I mean, you have to quote a phrase, you have to think of country first. Not politics first. And so, Senator Obama chose to get the 3 big electoral votes that he was already going to get from Delaware. He chose somebody with enormous experience in foreign policy and national security, in picking Joe Biden. Joe Biden is chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. There isn't a place in this world where Biden hasn't been and met with the leadership in Afghanistan and Iraq, you name it. Joe Biden could walk into the Oval Office in a crisis, because that's when the vice president moves up. I mean, the fact that he's moving up means something happened. And there's a crisis. At a time when the nation needs to be calm and united, at a time when our friends and enemies around the world need to be reassured, our friends and our enemies need to be told, don't try anything in this period of crisis. Joe Biden could walk into that Oval Office and begin operating. He hasn't just looked at Russia, he's met with its leaders. So I think on those 3 vitally important national security issues, there have been 3 tests. Iraq, I think Obama gets an A, and I think McCain gets an F. Afghanistan, I think Obama gets an A, and I think McCain gets an F. And in choosing the Vice President of the United States, I think Obama gets an A and McCain gets an F. Tell you, at work, around the coffee machine, in church, do not let people tell you that Obama, well, he may be good on the economy, but I'm not sure about him on national security. He has a proven record of making the right decisions on national security, and Senator McCain has a proven record of making the wrong decisions on national security. That's what you have to tell people, because that's the truth, and they need to hear it. But what about the economy? The economy is inextricably linked to national security. 4 days ago, the leaders of the Treasury Department and the Federal Reserve Bank rushed to Capitol Hill at night for an emergency meeting with the leadership of the Congress. And what they told the Congress stunned them. Congressman Barney Frank said he'd never seen 12 members of Congress speechless before. What they told the congressman was that we were days away from complete economic collapse unless Congress said it would do something. Complete economic collapse. No loans for anybody. Everything drying up, businesses shutting down. We came that close. And Congress, the leadership, the Democratic leadership said they would go along with the bailout, working out the details, but because the Democratic leadership said they would do it, the markets have been reassured and we're still okay. Why did this happen? It happened because the people in the federal government who were supposed to be regulating to make sure this didn't happen weren't. In fact, they changed the laws. You know, Franklin Roosevelt, after the last Great Depression, passed something called the Glass-Steagall Act, named after two congressmen, to make sure this never happened again. It set up a whole series of regulations. Well, a couple of years ago, the Congress got rid of the Glass-Steagall Act. Who pushed that through?
Phil Graham and
Phil Graham.
King.
Phil Graham, Senator Graham, who was McCain's economic advisor. He was Senator McCain's economic advisor until a few weeks ago, when he was overheard on tape to say, oh yeah, the American people, they're just a bunch of blinders. And then he had to quit the McCain campaign, quit. But he's the guy who wrote McCain's economic plan. The guy who, along with McCain, got rid of the regulations, deregulated the banking system, so they could do all these crazy loans that got us into trouble. And until last week, McCain has been running around the country for years saying, I'm against regulation. I'm the great deregulator. That's what he said. He actually said something like that at the beginning of last week, in the morning. And then in the afternoon, he was calling for regulation. We're going to have a period of economic hurt because of this. And you've got to decide who you want in the White House during that period of economic hurt. You want somebody who understands it, somebody who grew up a little tough, mother on food stamps, somebody who understands because he's worked in some pretty impoverished neighborhoods, knows what it's like for people to suffer. When plants closed down, there's no jobs. Do you want him? Or do you want somebody who, at the behest of the big banks, was part of this whole deregulation program that got us into this? I think it's extremely, extremely important that this election is not the right way. In Virginia, our state, to make the difference, it's a battleground state. For the first time in 40 years, it's a presidential battleground state. Now, depending on which week you look at the polls and which poll you look at, we're either up 1 point or down 2 points, but it's close. Just like 2 years ago when we elected Jim Webb, it was close. Very, very close. And Jim Webb has done a great job. Jim Webb pushed through veterans' benefits for the people who fought in Afghanistan and fought in Iraq. He did it. And for most of that time when he was trying to get that bill through to increase the benefits for our veterans, John McCain opposed it. Not incredible. John McCain opposed that veterans bill until the last moment, spoke out against it. And then when it was clear it was going to pass, he voted for it. Jim Webb's election mattered. And every vote mattered, because it was that close. It's going to be that close again. It's not enough that we just vote. It's not enough that we show up that day and cast our ballots. We've got to drag people. We've got to drag people to the polls on election day. We've got to spend the next 44 days, who's counting? 44 days convincing people. Not just the people who are unconvinced, but the people who think they're for McCain because they think he's better on national security, or because they think he's better on the economy. You've got to convince them. You've got to go to the Obama website, print off the position papers, get the arguments, get the talking points down, and you have to come out of your comfort zone. You have to come out of your comfort zone and convince people. None of us like to do that. None of us like to talk to people about politics or religion or things like that. Talk to our friends or our co-workers, people we go to church with. It's uncomfortable. It's going to be a heck of a lot more uncomfortable if Obama doesn't win. is one of the only states, I think it may be the only state, that closes its polls around 7 o'clock. And so it could be the first state that gets called that election as the results start pouring in. And I want to be there, watching the TV, and having all 3 or 4 networks, and Fox, say that the first state in Virginia voted for Barack Obama.